This morning we're going to move on to the next miracle in the book of John, and that is the miracle of the blind man. Jesus spits in the ground and makes clay out of it and anoints his eyes and sends him to the pool of Siloam and says, wash. And he goes to the pool of Siloam and he washes, and he comes back seeing. And if you just turn to John chapter 9, and John chapter 9 and verse 39, Jesus explains this miracle. And Jesus said, for judgment I am come into this world, that they which see might not see, and they which see might be made blind. So Jesus just explained it to us, so I guess that's all we need, right? So now to really understand it, we actually have to start way back in John chapter 7 to get there. So we'll go back to John chapter 7, and we'll see in verse 2, now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. Make sure this thing's turned on. And this gives us a setting for what's about to take place. The Jews' Feast of Tabernacles is at hand. This is the last feast of the Lord. We saw that Jesus had gone through pretty much, he went through Passover to trumpets. He skips atonement here and goes directly to tabernacles. And this is the feast in which Israel celebrates the fact that, number one, Jesus tabernacled with them in the wilderness, and also looks forward to when when God will again tabernacle with men in the kingdom. If you turn to Nehemiah 8, and Nehemiah 8 and verse 14, and they found written in the law which the Lord had commanded by Moses, that the children of Israel should dwell in booths in the feast of the 7th month, and that they should publish and proclaim in all their cities and in Jerusalem, saying, go forth unto the mount and fetch olive branches and pine branches and myrtle branches and palm branches and branches of thick trees to make booths, as it is written. So the people went forth and brought them and made themselves booths, every one upon the roof of his house, and in their courts, and in the courts of the house of God, and in the street of the water gate, and in the street of Ephraim. And all the congregation of them that were come again out of the captivity made booths, and sat under the booths. For since the time of Joshua the son of Nun unto that day had not the children of Israel done so. And there was a great gladness also day by day, from the first day to the last day. He read in the book of the law of God, and they kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day was a solemn assembly according unto the manner. Now, remember what Peter said. If you go to Mark 9, whenever Jesus was transfigured before them, and he was talking with Moses and Elijah, and they were right in the heavenly kingdom. Peter saw that, and Mark 9:4, he said, and there appeared unto them Elias with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus. And Peter answered and said unto Jesus, Master, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for thee, one for Moses, and one for Elias. So when Peter thought the kingdom had come, he said, oh, we better make tabernacles. So it was very plain that they understood the Feast of the Tabernacles was whenever God was going to come and tabernacle among men. It hadn't been celebrated, it hadn't been kept from the time of Joshua until the time of Ezra, and by that time God was no longer tabernacling among them. God was in heaven. You read in Ezekiel how the glory of the Lord went up and up and up and into heaven. So the main point of this feast was to commemorate God dwelling among the nation and to look forward to when he would be dwelling again among them. Now Jesus goes up to this feast secretly. Then in the middle of the 8-day feast, he goes into the temple and begins to teach them. Now it should be noted that he goes into the temple and begins to teach them, but he's not just teaching the ones that are in the temple. He would be teaching the whole nation here, because 3 times of the year, all males from the nation had to come up to Jerusalem to celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles. So he is now witnessing to the entire nation again. And now Jesus is going to, during this feast, Jesus is going to present himself as God to the nation. He is going to be there. This feast that celebrates God dwelling among men, Jesus is going to basically say, I am God and I'm dwelling among you. And he does this, he says this in many different ways. He says that, believe in me, and whosoever believe in me, out of their bellies shall flow living waters, and different ways he communicates this. He finally does just come right out and say that he's God. So we're not going to go through all this, but for the sake of time, we're going to look at how they responded to that. Look at John chapter 7 again, and I would say keep a marker there, which I did not do. John chapter 7 and verse 20. The people answered and said, Thou hast a devil. Who go about to kill thee? So the people, that could be Jews, that could be Galileans, that could even be Samaritans. The people is just descendants of Jacob. And you see that all through the Bible. Whenever it talks about the people, it's always talking about the descendants of Jacob. Then down in verse 25, then said some of them of Jerusalem, Is this not he whom they seek to kill? But lo, he speaketh boldly, and they say nothing unto him. Do the rulers know indeed that this is the very Christ? Howbeit we know that this man whence he is. But when Christ cometh, no man knoweth whence he is. So this is some of them of Jerusalem. So these are the Jews. And what they're basically saying is, this is the guy that the rulers want to kill, and he's right out here in the open. Why aren't they coming and getting him? Do they really think that he's the Christ? Is that why they're not coming to get him? Well, we know better than they do, because whenever Christ comes, nobody's going to know where he came from, but this man, we know where he comes from, so we know he's not the Christ. So we have the Jews here saying that we know this isn't the Christ. And you can see here that they were believing that their reasoning for that was that when Christ comes, no man will know where he came from, but everybody should have known where he came from. He came from Bethlehem. So that's pretty easy. Then down in chapter 7, verse 32, the Pharisees heard that the people murmured such things concerning him, and the Pharisees and chief priests sent officers to take him. So while some people believe, the people say that he has a devil, the Jews can't understand why the rulers haven't grabbed him, and the rulers send officers to take him. The officers return without taking him, and in verse 45, you see, Then came the officers to the chief priests and Pharisees, and they say unto them, Why have ye not brought him? The officers answered, Never man spake like this. Then answered them the Pharisees, Are ye also deceived? Have any of the rulers or the Pharisees believed on him? But this people knoweth not the law, are cursed. So keep verse 49 in the back of your mind, because it says it's kind of important to the issue of the blind man, because the Pharisees are saying that those who believe on him are cursed because they don't know the law. They don't know the law. They're blind. So they're cursed and they're blind and they're following this false Messiah. So just keep that in mind. Now, the next day, Jesus bears record that he is the Son of God and God himself. Let's look at chapter 8 and verse 12. Chapter 8 and verse 12. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Now, notice what he is. He's the light of the world. So, if you're the light of the world, then you can see. If there's light, you can see. But the people that are in darkness, they're blind. They can't see. So, he's saying, I'm the light of the world. I'm the one that can open the eyes of the blind. In verse 13, the Pharisees therefore said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself. Thy record is not true. Jesus answered and said unto him, Though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true. For I know whence I came and whither I go. But ye cannot tell whence I come and whither I go. Ye judge after the flesh. I judge no man. And yet if I judge, my judgment is true. For I am not alone, but I and the Father that sent me. It is also written in your law that the testimony of two men is true. I am one that bear witness of myself, and the Father that sent me bear witness of me. Then said they unto him, Where is thy Father? Jesus answered, Ye neither know me nor my Father. If ye had known me, ye should know my Father also. These words spake Jesus in the treasury as he taught in the temple, and no man laid hands on him, for his hour was not yet come. Should have had that up earlier. Okay, so Christ claims that the Father is a witness to him, and elsewhere he claims that the works that he does, the scriptures that spoke of him, and then he bears witness of himself. So there's a fourfold witness. And then a bit later, Jesus speaking to those Jews. Now, these Jews had been his disciples. When what we're going to talk about now is Jews who had been his disciples, who had turned back and gone back away from him. They were those Jews that we didn't get to this last week, but if you turn back to John 6, whenever he said, you have to eat my flesh and drink my blood, for my flesh is meat indeed, and my blood is drink indeed, these disciples turned back from him. In John 6 and verse 66, it says, From that time many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him. Now, I'm sure this is just a coincidence, but if you notice, that verse is 666. John 6:66. Just a coincidence, but now back here in chapter 8, he encounters these disciples in the treasury as he's teaching, and he tells them that they can still be his disciples. In John 8, verse 31, Then said Jesus to those Jews which believed him, If ye continue in my word, then ye are my disciples. Ye are my disciples indeed. And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. They answered him, We be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, Thou shalt be free? Jesus answered them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is a servant of sin, and the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, ye shall be free indeed. I know that ye are Abraham's seed, but ye seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my Father, and ye do that which ye have seen with your father. Sorry, I'm got a bit. My tongue's all swelled up here. So they want no part of this. They don't want any part of this, and they lay claim to Abraham. Jesus tells them that he knows that Abraham is their father after the flesh, but they are doing what they have seen of their spiritual father. Then again in verse 39 of chapter 8, they answered and said unto him, Abraham is our father. Jesus saith unto them, If ye were Abraham's children, ye would do the works of Abraham. But now ye seek to kill me, a man which have told you the truth, which I have heard of God, and this did not Abraham. Ye do the deeds of your father. Then said they unto him, we be not born of fornication. We have one Father, even God. Now here they imply, here's their faithlessness. They imply that Jesus was born of fornication. So that story of Jesus' birth is well known. And everybody knows, even down in Jerusalem, they know, oh, he was born of fornication. And that just shows that their lack of faith in believing that he was born of the Spirit and not of fornication. And again, they claim Abraham. Then in verse 42, Jesus said unto them, If God were your Father, ye would love me, for I proceeded forth and came from God. Neither came I of myself, but he sent me. Why do ye not understand my speech? Even because ye cannot hear my word. Ye are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father ye will do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So, they're claiming Abraham as their father, and Jesus exposes to them who their real father is. And now it's these former disciples that have fallen away that he's speaking to, and that kind of gives you a foreshadowing of the disciples in the 70th week, that when they fall away and go after their father, then they're done. Their father is the devil. And that is supposed to be a picture of a cherubim, and well, he's a cherubim, so that's so you got the ox, the man, and the lion, and then the eagle would be on the other side. So okay, so there's no doubt in whatsoever in what Jesus is telling them. So in John chapter 8, verse 56. Your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and was glad. Then said the Jews unto him, Thou art not yet 50 years old, and hast seen Abraham? Jesus saith unto them, Verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. So now there's absolutely no doubt what he's saying. He's saying he is standing in the temple in the Feast of the Tabernacles, which is the feast that celebrates God dwelling among men, and saying, I am God, I am dwelling among you, I am. And if you go back to Exodus chapter 3, we see that there's absolutely no doubt in what he is telling them in Exodus chapter 3 and verse 13. And Moses said unto God, Behold, when I come unto the children of Israel, and shall say unto them, The God of your fathers sent me unto you, and they shall say unto me, What is his name, that I shall say unto them? And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus thou shalt say unto the children of Israel, I am hath sent you. So Jesus is in no uncertain terms telling them that he is the Elohim of the Old Testament. Then back in John chapter 8, then they took up stones to cast at him, but Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. So as he does so often, he just has this kind of magical ability. Whenever they're going to grab him, he just kind of disappears and walks right through the midst of them, and he goes out of the temple. He is now leaving the grounds of the temple. He's no longer in it. So now when he goes out of the temple, just imagine, now this is the temple here, and on the right and the left I put little blue triangles, and I spent a lot of time doing that, and it was just, but if you ever look at pictures, even today, of what Sukkot, it's called in Israel, looks like, it is just stuffed, the streets are just stuffed full of these little booths that they make now, and we read earlier about in Nehemiah's day, how the streets and the temple and all around were just stuffed the avenues were just stuffed full of these booths. And so now Jesus is walking out. He walked out of the temple, and now he's walking among these booths. And then in chapter 8, 59, it ends saying, going through the midst of them, and so passed by. And then when chapter 9 begins, it says, and as Jesus passed by. So we're still here at the same day, the same event. Jesus is now just passing by. He's out of the temple, and now he's passing by all these booths. And as he passes by, he sees a man that was blind from birth. And in verse 2 of chapter 9, and his disciples, he saw a man which was blind from birth in chapter 9:1. So then in verse 2, and his disciples asked him, saying, Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, who was born blind? Jesus answered, neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents, but that the works of God should be manifest in him. So he's going to give sight to this man so that the works of God might be manifest in this man. And manifest means plain, open, clearly visible to the eye, or obvious to the understanding, apparent, not obscure or difficult to be understood. So that's the work that he's going to make in this man. It's going to be very plain and very open. And then in verse 4, he says, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So, excuse me again. Jesus must work the works of him that sent him. So this is going to be a big clue. Jesus must work the works of him that sent him. He is the light of the world while he is in the world, which begs the question, where's the light of the world going to come from once Jesus is out of the world? So that's the question that's going to get answered here. And in verse 6 then, when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. So he makes clay and anoints the man's eyes with clay. So what are we made out of? Clay, mud. If you turn back to Job chapter 33, Job chapter 33 and verse 6, it says, Behold, I am according to thy wish in God's stead. I also am formed out of the clay. So we are clay. Paul calls us earthen vessels. So Jesus makes clay, puts it in his eyes. He makes what men are made out of and puts it in his eyes. So then in Isaiah 45 and verse 9. Woe unto him that striveth with his maker. Let the potsherd strive with the potsherds of the earth. Shall the clay say unto him that fashioneth it, What makest thou, or thy work? He hath no hands. Now several passages in the Old Testament, in Jeremiah, and then in Paul, he talks about this too, about God is the potter, we are the clay. And so we're made out of clay. Then in back in John 9, in verse 7, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. So we have here we have the word sent again. Jesus says that he must work the work of him that sent him while he is on the earth. So who's going to work that work after he's gone? Well, he's going to have to send somebody. So when this blind man washes off the clay, he's washing symbolically, he's washing off the flesh. He's getting rid of the flesh, And, Paul talks about that a lot. We're new creatures and so on. Well, this man symbolically is washing off that clay. He's washing off that flesh. And he's doing what Moses had told the nation to do way back in Deuteronomy. So if you turn back to Deuteronomy chapter 10, Deuteronomy chapter 10, and this is something that Israel should have been doing throughout their history, and they had never done it. This man does it. He washes off the flesh and is given sight. In Deuteronomy 10 and verse 15, only the Lord had delight in thy fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, even you above all people, as it is this day. Circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart, and be no more stiff-necked. So that is basically what's happening here. When he washes off the flesh, he's circumcising his heart. So the meaning of the sign of the miracle, I believe, then becomes clear. Christ has been rejected. He stood in the temple while Israel celebrated that God was dwelling among men and said that I am God and I'm dwelling among you. And he told them plainly to all those around him. He was rejected then, and now that he's been rejected, he's promising that he will choose those outside the temple. Remember, he left the temple and he was passing by this guy. So now he's outside the temple. He's going to choose those who are also outside the temple. The people that are they're not Jews, they're not of Jerusalem, they're the dogs of up north, they're the Galileans. Where am I here? So this continues to play out in the narrative as we go along then. Jesus had just been among the Pharisees. They had tried to bait him into saying something they could use against him whenever they brought a woman that had been taken in adultery in the very act. And they came and they said, Moses said we should stone this woman, but what do you say? And he just is silent, and he just starts writing in the dirt, and they keep after him, and finally he says, let he who is without sin among you cast the first stone, and they kind of all just drift away. Now, this man is going to be sent back to the Pharisees that Jesus had just been rejected by. If you look in John 9 and verse 13, they brought to the Pharisees him that aforetime was blind, and it was the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, he put clay upon mine eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, this man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, how can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. So just as with the lame man at the pool of Bethesda, Jesus heals on the Sabbath day. And this is very upsetting to the Pharisees because they say that you should not do that on the Sabbath day. But also, this man is manifesting the works of God to the Pharisees. He's going to them and he's saying, he's showing them, I was blind, now I see. And he the same way the apostles will do that later on in the book of Acts. And then they kind of get divided, and then something really strange. They actually ask this blind man for his opinion, which is very strange for a Pharisee to do. In verse 17, they say unto the blind man again, what sayest thou of him, that he openeth thine eyes? He said, he is a prophet. Well, then they have to bring his parents in to validate. They say, well, okay, he probably wasn't even blind to begin with. So they bring in his parents, and they say, yeah, he was blind. He was blind from birth. We're his parents. That's our son. He can now see. And the story goes on. We're not going to read all these verses, but they verify that he was son. And now, after he's verified, he's going to teach the Pharisees, and they're not going to like that at all. So down in verse 24, then again called the man that was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know this man was a sinner. He answered and said, Whether he be a sinner or no, I know not. One thing I know, that whereas I was blind, now I see. Then they said unto him again, What did he do to thee? How opened he thine eyes? He answered them and said, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will ye be also his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, Thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake to Moses. As for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, Why herein is it a marvelous thing, that ye know not where from whence he is, and yet he hath opened my eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, it was not heard that any man opened the eyes of one that was born blind, and if this man were not of God, he could do nothing. Then they answered unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sins, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. So they get mad, and they throw him out of the temple. So this man becomes a foreshadowing of the apostles after Christ's ascension. His eyes is opened. His flesh is symbolically put off. He is sent to testify of what happened to him. So look at, just flip over to John 14. John 14, verse 26. But the Comforter, which is the Holy Ghost, whom the Father will send in my name, he shall teach you all things, and bring all things into your remembrance, whatsoever I have said unto you. And then in Acts 1:8, Jesus again tells them, But ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost is come upon you, and ye shall be witnesses unto me both in Jerusalem and all Judea and in Samaria and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. So this man testifies, first of all, this shows that the disciples, the apostles, although they had faith, they were still blind. They still didn't see what was going on. And there's a lot of verses, I'll put them up here in a minute, that bear that out, that they really didn't know what was going on, because even when Christ had told them that I'm going to rise again the third day, when he did, they were like, what? We don't, what? He rose again? We don't believe that. And so, so this man then testifies to the leadership, just as Peter did in Acts 4, after the lame man is healed in Acts 3. And finally, he has faith that Jesus is Messiah. And back in John 9, in verse 35, Jesus heard that they had cast him out, and when they had found him, he said unto them, Dost thou believe on the Son of God? He answered and said, Who is he, Lord, that I might believe on him? And Jesus saith unto him, Thou hast both seen him, and it is he that talketh with thee. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. Now, we're back to where we started. I will whenever my little red X comes up in my paper. I know, I do miss those little red X's. Yeah, it is coming. Now Jesus makes plain what this miracle was all about in verse 39. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come into this world, that they which see not might see, that they which see might be made blind. So remember way back in John 7:48, I said, remember whenever the Pharisees said, Have any of the rulers of the Pharisees believed on him? But this people who knoweth not the law are cursed. The Pharisees are saying, these people are blind, but we can see. And the Pharisees, and Jesus says, I came to make the people that are blind see, and the people that see blind. So the Pharisees and rulers proclaimed that they could see, but the people who knew not the law were cursed. They believed that they alone could see, but the common Hebrew didn't know the law like they did, and so therefore they were cursed. And there are many verses throughout the Old Testament that talk about the blind leaders of Israel. And we'll just read one here, and you don't have to go there but for time's sake. But Matthew 13:14, and in them is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah, which says, by hearing ye shall hear and not understand, and seeing ye shall see and not perceive. So here are the Pharisees who believe they can see, but they're actually blind. This is actually borne out then in the end of the chapter, the last couple verses, where verse 40, and some of the Pharisees were with him, heard these words, and said unto him, are we blind also? Jesus said unto them, if ye were blind, ye should have no sin. But now ye say, we see, therefore your sin remaineth. Because these Pharisees, they thought, well, we know it. We know what's going on. We can see. And he said, you can see, so your sin's still with you. So the apostles, they were still blind up until after the resurrection of Christ. In Mark 8, verse 14, you don't have to turn there, but now the disciples had forgotten to take bread, neither had they in the ship with them more than one loaf. And he charged them, saying, take heed, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod. And they reasoned among themselves, saying, it is because we have no bread. And when Jesus knew it, he saith unto them, why reason ye because ye have no bread? Perceive ye not, neither understand? Have ye your heart yet hardened? Having eyes, see ye not? Having ears, hear ye not? And do ye not remember? And then, so they don't remember, and there's a lot of verses that show that they don't remember and they don't understand until after the resurrection of Christ. And just one verse there, John 12:16, these things understood not his disciples at the first, but when Jesus was glorified, then remembered they these things which were written of him, and that they had done these things unto him. So the disciples were kept blind. They were kept in the dark until after the resurrection of Christ. And that's whenever the Holy Spirit was poured out on them. And that's whenever they put off their flesh the same way that man, when he had washed in the pool of Siloam, he had put off the clay, he had put off his flesh, and now he could see. When the Holy Spirit falls on them, that takes off their flesh. They're now driven by the Holy Spirit, and now they have sight. And so I'll just read the ending here and we'll be done. So again, this miracle sign is looking forward to the ultimate rejection of Christ by a blind Israel, his crucifixion and ascension, when he would no longer be the light of the world. He is showing how his light will still be manifested to Israel by giving sight to the blind that believe, and further blinding those who say that they can see. And that's all I have to say about that. And I made it. So let's